When you think of rock and roll's greatest rivalry, only two names come to mind: the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Throughout the 1960s, these bands defined not only the sound of a generation, but the very idea of what it meant to be a rock star. While media and fans fueled the narrative of fierce competition, the truth is far more nuanced and far more fascinating. These two legendary groups weren't just rivals, they were mutual inspirations, cultural juggernauts, and ultimately architects of modern music history. In 1962, both bands were just getting started. The Beatles, hailing from Liverpool, combined tight harmonies, boy-next-door charm, and infectious songwriting. The Stones from London were the darker, grittier response, blues-obsessed, rebellious, and unpolished. The contrast was immediate and irresistible. The Beatles wore suits, smiled for the camera, and sang about love. The Stones wore leather, sneered at authority, and sang about desire, danger, and disillusionment. But despite the media's desire to pit them against each other, the bands shared more in common than most realized. In fact, the Beatles helped the Rolling Stones secure their first record deal. It was George Harrison who recommended them to Decca Records, the same label that had famously rejected the Beatles. Lennon and McCartney even wrote the Stones' second single, I Wanna Be Your Man, giving them a boost just as their careers were taking off. As the British invasion gained momentum, both bands skyrocketed to international fame. The Beatles broke in America first, conquering The Ed Sullivan Show and dominating the charts. But the Stones weren't far behind, soon winning over fans with hits like I Can't Get No Satisfaction, Paint It Black, and Get Off of My Cloud. While the Beatles were seen as the clean-cut pop geniuses, the Stones embraced their bad boy image and leaned into it. Musically, the bands took divergent but equally groundbreaking paths. The Beatles evolved at lightning speed. By the mid-60s, they had moved beyond love songs and into psychedelia, experimentation, and genre-bending innovation, with albums like Rubber Soul, Revolver, and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The Stones, on the other hand, stayed closer to their roots in blues and rock, channeling raw energy into gritty albums like Aftermath, Beggar's Banquet, and Let It Bleed. Yet the two bands continued to influence each other in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. After the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper, the Stones answered with the psychedelic Their Satanic Majesty's Request. While it didn't receive the same acclaim, it showed how the bands watched each other, responded to trends, and pushed the envelope in their own ways. Even their album covers became battlegrounds of innovation and style. The rivalry wasn't entirely media-driven either. John Lennon once criticized Mick Jagger for mimicking the Beatles' press conferences. Paul McCartney referred to the Stones as a great little blues cover band in a 2020 interview, while Jagger retorted that the Beatles didn't last as long on the road. But underneath the barbs was a deep, enduring respect. When the Beatles broke up in 1970, it was clear that both bands had reshaped music, and done so partly by pushing each other forward. As the decades rolled on, the narrative shifted. The Beatles, who disbanded at the height of their creative powers, became a symbol of artistic perfection. The Stones, who kept touring and releasing albums, became the model for rock longevity. While the Beatles' catalog remains frozen in time, the Stones' story continues, gritty, imperfect, but undeniably iconic. The legacy of their so-called rivalry is perhaps best seen in how both bands changed the music industry. They set new standards for songwriting, album production, marketing, and global influence. They made rock music a serious art form, opened doors for countless acts, and turned concerts into cultural events. Without the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, there would be no arena tours, no concept albums, and no global rock superstardom as we know it. In recent years, surviving members of both bands have acknowledged their shared history with warmth. McCartney and Jagger have traded compliments, with Paul even joining the Stones on stage in 2022. Fans no longer have to choose a side. It's understood that both bands were essential, revolutionary, and, in their own unique ways, unbeatable. Today, the Beatles versus Stones debate is less about competition and more about celebrating two extraordinary paths through music history. It's about how contrast creates innovation, how friendly rivalry fuels greatness, and how sometimes being different doesn't mean being opposed. It means being legendary together.